Hola, buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your attendance. Our next speaker is Concepcion Naval, who holds a chair in education theory, and she's a dean in the University of Navarra. And she's here with us today to discuss the significance of aesthetic education through musea. Concepcion edits a magazine, Estudios en Educación, and she is focused on citizens' education and social participation and teaching innovation through new communication methodologies for the school and university environments and musea as educational spaces. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Concepcion. So I should like to start by thanking the organizers of this conference, ICAT 2015, for the kind invitation to be here with us today to discuss a very important topic, at least for me, and I hope it's also for all of you, and that's aesthetical training as part of human education. I'll speak Spanish since I know there will be translation into English. Thanks to the translator who's up there. If I were to speak too fast, she would give me a sign, and that make things much easier. And I have a handout as well with a summary, in case it might help follow up this session. I'm told we've got some 60 minutes, for which I would like to use some 30 or 40, no more, for my explanation, and then we will have time for questions or anything you might consider interesting and might help us have a healthy dialogue on this very interesting topic. This session, again, focuses on aesthetical training, starting with the need we have for it for the full training of a human being. And there is one itinerary for the promotion of this kind of training, and that would be through musea. There would be others, of course, in order to achieve it. And I should like to, for that last part, to take some real examples I've been working on together with a museum. I've been working at museum. I would like to say this is not part of the teaching of plastics arts or anything limited to the concretion of aesthetical works. But I would like to take a step back today and explain what we call aesthetical training. And such idea is based on theory, on principles, in order to improve our practice, the practice of aesthetical training in our educational training as well. So, we could say that we need to have this aesthetical training from very different points of view. I would like to refer to it from the idea of training citizens that need to be active and involved to design what's the role of aesthetical training for the promotion of social training or civic training, and the other way around, what's the relationship between aesthetical and civic training? That's necessary to have critical citizens, and for that we need to offer them real opportunities in order for them to be involved in analysis, in problem solving, not only in their local community, but also the global, national community. And for that, citizens' education, it is also responsibility of training institutions such as the university, and it is not just subsidiary to education. Regardless of research, I think all students, especially if they're university students, should be given an opportunity to increase, to thrive in their moral sensitivity, to gain knowledge on relevant values, be enabled to make ethical decisions, and then develop their own autonomy. So they need to learn how to face pressure from the group and society. These four, I consider, basic tasks for moral training for civic training, I think the first task that would be increasing moral sensitivity, I would say it is or should be related to aesthetical training. As part of it, we could also refer to the 4 proposals by Martha Nussbaum in her book Not for Profit, where she clearly explains the need for arts and humanities in education, because these need to be developed in upper education to strengthen democratic societies, as she puts it. And in her references to ideas that have to be promoted in higher education, there are several, but I've only chosen 3 of them. First, we need to have self-examination abilities in our students. Then, we need to raise a sense of world citizenship. And thirdly, she refers, and this last suggestion, I think it's more closely related to aesthetical training, has to do with raising what she calls a narrative imagination, the idea of being a smart reader of personal stories or life stories. Both one way or the other, when we talk about civic education, I think it is only clear that when we see the relationship between the arts and citizens' education, well, they've been related for a long time now in Western mindset, where we see different approaches, different research fields, where we have aesthetics, psychology, education, politics. The arts, I would say, can change people's lives thanks to that wide spectrum or range of cognitive, emotional, and social skills, both in personal and social contexts. And actually, I would summarize the idea of what I've said so far with a sentence that I've found in the University of Columbia as you go into the Art and Education Department at the Teachers College. And it's interesting how there in Columbia, arts education is part of the core curriculum there for all university students for any discipline graduating there. And that's where, on the front door, you could see this by Maxine Greene. I quote, "She is an academic quite loved in the Teachers College." And I found this revealing. As you can read, the arts, it has been said, cannot change the world, but they might change human lives, human beings who might change the world. And my topic for today is that those people who can appreciate and see beauty, I think they're better prepared, first to tackle challenges given by society. We need to face those because we live in our society. And on the other hand, that way, people can have a fuller life, can share their fullness or their fulfillment with others. They can share. And that's the target of social virtue, the basic social skills of a good citizen. And yet, there are many underlying questions, and we only have limited time and we cannot summarize them all. But I think there are 3 questions that I would like to ask that we might not answer here because we wouldn't have the time, but they would be the backdrop for the rest of my presentation. First question would be, what does appreciating beauty that we say slightly, what does it mean? How do we learn how to appreciate beauty? Second question would be a bit more striking. How can we get that aesthetic education? How we can appreciate beauty and how can it be developed? And then, probably that would be the final part of my presentation. What's the role of musea, especially university musea? Here, I said university musea, because that's the experience I've been involved in and engaged into. And near us, we don't have many university musea, but that's the case in many other countries, mainly Saxon countries, where musea became means for education for students, another chance for education. The idea is that aesthetic education, it's part and parcel of human education that needs to happen in synchrony with other kinds of education: affective, emotional, moral, intellectual, civic. So the next idea would be discussing the framework that will help us discuss aesthetic education, and that's the individual and the importance of education. Nowadays, when we discuss education, probably you will all agree that the most common reference when talking about education, we think of a group of human beings. So when we say there is a need for education, it seems that it cannot be understood as something different from a task that is valid or useful for several people. And the best known ideas on education are usually focused on groups and collectivities as a reference, without denying the community reach of education, which is indeed necessary. Well, still, we need to forget that above everything else is aimed at individual subjects, each of which, when summed up, they are people. So standards or methods or learning objectives are always personal or maybe interpersonal. No other task, apart from education, has a more direct impact on each person. So the basic value of education is based on that close and direct relationship, immediate relationship to each person. And from the dignity of that person, we get excellence in education, which the idea is that education is an excellent task not because of its innate consistency or productiveness. It is excellent because of its object, its subject, that it's a person. As for other human activities, we see that it's clearly different. For any other human activity, we can talk about production of things or results, but that's not what's paramount in education, not at all. A second idea of excellence in education, I think it's part of the previous one, and still it's interesting, highlighted independently when talking about aesthetic education, and that is that this approach to education as on a personal basis, I think that's why education is immune to success or failure. Failure and success understood just on a result basis. Actually, what I think is that this personal nature of education is what's paramount, and that helps us understand that education is not just a mere activity, but basically it is an action, and hence the first and most important result or outcome is the one that lies with the person and not with the things that are done. This is pretty difficult to understand in this pragmatic society we live in, as we see come into fruition in so many examples, one of which would be rejection, often to aesthetic education, or neglection of aesthetic education. And so my proposal would be looking into human education, education as a whole, as a resistance against instrumental culture. And this can be done especially by promoting aesthetic education. A good way of resisting, of facing the instrumental culture around us would be to promote and enjoy aesthetic education. Well, nowadays, the reasoning would be the following, as I understand it. Whatever is taught will be the knowledge. And that knowledge would be the greatest possession, and so we need to teach what's most useful to face life as part of participating in culture, social relations, and of course for job placement. Said like that, there's no argument. It seems unarguable, and naturally the tension is unsurmountable. And yet, this approach, I think, might lead to mistake, might be misleading, and in current situation might lead to the neglection of the personal reference that I mentioned before. First of all, as part of this approach, I think the criterion, the design criterion is subtle, but it's real. Usefulness. What's the most valuable thing in education? It's what's most useful. So we teach what's considered to be more appropriate because it's more beneficial, more fruitful, but under the rule of instrumental reasoning, most useful thing would be what can be best used, or what get us better outcomes or better performance, not just for intellectual training, but everything, personality, coexistence. And even if it's not made explicit, somehow there is an underlying understanding of knowledge as part of power. And this is not rejectable per se, again, but I guess there's room to discuss its reach, because by that criterion, the value of the arts or the humanities in human education would be endangered. As part of this framework where we try to recover the value of the arts and the humanities, that's where we need to consider aesthetic education. I think I've taken quite a long step back to get to this point, but I think it's worth it. Aesthetic education that was missing so far in contemporary education. And I think it also indicates that education as personal growth itself has a hierarchy. When we talk about aesthetic education, we are not referring to everything, but we are referring to something that is necessary. And I think it is important to tell apart what would be education and education dimensions and its hierarchy, and then ethical and anthropological classification, and then the teaching sequence we need to follow for such training. Human education has different dimensions, as we all know, different levels that can be differentiated, but all of them are ordered in a way. The old Greek minds were right when they said education should always start by gymnastics, then music, then literature, and then mathematics. So first physical education, then aesthetic education, then we would get emotional education, and intellectual education and moral education. And that's how we can adequately face aesthetic education, as I understand it. Training in that idea of appreciating beauty. So we can compare it to the most basic element, that it's sensitive skills. When we talk about aesthetic education, the reference is always that ability to perceive, to appreciate beauty, which naturally starts from the senses. We learn how to see, how to listen, how to do basic external sensitivity. So someone who's been trained can enjoy watching works of art, but other times in life, different beauty moments in life. And so this ability would mean integrating rational skills and sensitive skills, basic skills. We cannot have an aesthetic experience without the senses and from the senses. And so aesthetic tradition is always considered as one of the main senses. It is not because others are not important, but because sight and hear are the ones that get us swiftly in relation with the spiritual plane. So beyond what we can touch, smell, or taste. And that's why the plastic arts, music, is considered the hotspot in the accomplishment of beauty because it's focusing on the sight and the hear senses. And yet, to get there, to the apex of sensitivity, we need to start elsewhere by starting. And just like that, we see the activity of our senses, such as taste, smell, or touch. And they are more material than sight and hear, and yet important, especially for education for kids. And this is specified as part of external sensitivity, naturally, where we see that's the basic sense for internal sensitivity. And that internal sensitivity helps us hear, see, smell, taste, and touch. And that way we feel that we hear, we feel that we taste, we feel that we see. Then we can also use imagination and represent sensitive objects when those objects aren't present anymore. And through memory, we remember them, we recall them, and we keep them with us at the same time. And that way we can project them into the future by starting human actions, by inciting human actions. And so, training in senses, cognitive or trend-based, are the basis, are the starting point for aesthetic education. And yet, I consider it's important to see how it seems to be no barrier, no line between what's sensitive, or those that are trend-based, that take us to action. And I think there are times or stages where we pay attention to senses, but always close to taking care of emotions in education, because aesthetic education, as I understand it, is always hand in hand with training in affection management. And they're both the basis of all moral and intellectual items of that training, and all related to other activities for coexistence. And that's what defines a person. And society is that human space where education happens. Here, where we see the bond between what's aesthetic and what's effective, there is a quote by Aristotle, which is one of my favorite quotes, for a definition of education, which is quite casual, quite informal, but very smart, as I said. According to Aristotle, the best way to define education is learn how to get sad and happy with what's right, or where it belongs. So we need to be happy or sad with what makes us better or worse. And I think that's the linking between both elements in training that we've discussed so far. So, and we've referred so far to aesthetic education, broadly speaking, and we've explained how this can be done. And I would like to refer to where that aesthetic education can happen. And as part of that, briefly, but if you're interested, we can discuss it later, I would like to refer to a study, an analysis at the MoMA in New York, 2013. I was there, and we carried out an research on the programs, family programs, kids and family programs. That's my favorite or preferred subjects as targets for MUSEA. And why do I refer to it? Well, I think I would like to get closer to the world of MUSEA as a cultural institution, as an educational institution where aesthetic education can be favored and where we can have trust-based relations in the MUSEA with the museum visitors. Is a good way to learn, and learn especially not just intellectual questions, but emotional questions as well, or aesthetic questions. And that's the case with these workshops organized for different target groups and families, quite often in museum. And learning as part of this, as part of museum, could be understood as the result of three interactions. And we have Sari Tisman with us. She's not in the room, but she's at the conference, and I would like to refer to her. She's a Harvard professor for the Zero project, and she conducted this research on the potential value of a museum. Harvard Museum, Sackler, which is the largest there, was closed down back in 2006 for 3 years to rethink the purpose of a university museum. And Sari Tisman, together with other colleagues at the education faculty, they had to rethink the purpose of a university museum. And as part of that, these authors show how in a museum, which is a space for discovery, knowledge, and experience, as they put it, you can learn three sectors, so to say. First, you can learn regarding the environment, the setting. That would be the museum. That's a room for discovery, for learning, for having experiences. You can also learn regarding other people, family members, people that accompany you in your visit, people you come across in the museum, or even the curators. And it's funny how they mentioned this third, and that has to do with the artistic object, the final object. Probably, if we were asked, we would say first comes the object, and then the setting, and thirdly, people. But they follow a different sequence. Artistic objects, because it's singular, it's so unique, it is authentic, it has its own features, and so it becomes an object of observation. And we learn through it. We learn how to appreciate value, and you learn how to get abstracted. We learn that way. We use the knowledge that we have on the arts. We learn from what's authentic, what's real. The role of a museum might have a huge learning potential, contrary to other settings such as home or school. This is a room for informal education beyond the recreational space that it is, because it is. Just a few weeks back, there was a true problem, or controversy in the social media. How absurd it is to take kids to contemporary art musea. And well, it was quite a hot topic, a controversy, as I said, because they were discussing if it was pointless to take it to contemporary art musea, where even sometimes adults might find it challenging. But of course, my proposal is, yes, something can be done, and we get a wonderful experience, and also teaching opportunity, and it's not just intellectual. In the museum, we have specific programs for adolescents and kids, and so they make it possible to share time together at the museum. Sometimes we see museums as something individualistic, and probably we would get a much better experience if the museum becomes an environment, a setting, a room for coexistence. Those activities that go beyond amusement or entertainment means that we need to have teamwork, and then kids and parents and teenagers have an opportunity to enjoy the exhibit together. And so visitors have a skill and learn how to admire, appreciate, to understand different things, especially by moving around it. And as part of that, I've worked for the last 2 years in a project which I would like to share with you. the university I work at in Navarra, as part of the Educational and Psychology department, I was tasked with the following. I had to find the rationale of the basic idea, the role of education in a university museum, or on paper. What would its role be in a contemporary arts museum? And I have this document. I can hand it to you if you're interested. And it was Education in Museum, produced in 2013, late 2013. What could be the mission and vision of a university museum? Undoubtedly, the mission needs to be in line with three main missions of any university, and that's research, teaching, and commitment to society. And revolving around all those three axes, we could have the rationale for a museum. Research, first of all. A museum should have an interdisciplinary approach, and since it is part of an academic center, it has to be surrounded by different disciplines and knowledge areas. And so it produces research that is based on different synergies. We need to have meeting points for faculties, universities, department, bodies that can be a referral center, as part of the academic institution. Then teaching. Musea need to be a training channel for the whole university community, not just for students, not just for outside visitors, but for the whole community, in order to have a new service into the outside, to get open to the adjacent environment and improve teaching quality in the classroom, expand knowledge sensitivity towards the arts in every element for students and staff and everyone else. As I said, in Colombia, I was happy to learn how the core curriculum of any student needs to have training in this field. And finally, this idea of commitment, of dissemination of knowledge as well. It can also mean that it can have quite an important role there. In all three fields, we see the role of a museum that would be, or I would like it to be, getting the arts closer to citizens, disseminate new ways of artistic expression, and be the bridge between academic institution and the city as well. Get the arts closer to the citizens. What a wonderful task. Education, in its broadest sense, lies in the core of a museum itself. It's not something from the outside where you can have a one-off program, but it's part of the core of the heart of the museum, and it can come to fruition in other values. What could be the broadest targets or purposes of a museum? Well, I think there are 5 of them. First, well, you might think it is too social activity, but I fully believe in it. The first mission, or the main purpose of the museum, would be making the lives of people richer through commitment to the arts. It would be unthinkable of having a museum without such a purpose. We need to get a better life for them. Then the audience need to have a chance to discover and develop their talents, their creativity and ability to appreciate. That's an opportunity we give them for them to develop those activities. Thirdly, the museum has a clear target, and that is helping others gain knowledge, help others get a better understanding and a better way to enjoy the arts, even though it might be complicated, such as in contemporary art. And then another purpose would be promote the advancement of research through scientific research, innovative research, and then finally, if it is a university museum, academic museum, or a school museum, as part of the teaching community, we need to promote learning through the collections available in the museum that might be temporary or permanent collections. What's the target audience of a university museum? Well, there are many, but as I said before, I think families and kids are the most interesting. Of course, the university community, the elderly, other entities, local entities, but especially families and kids. I think the educational potential of a museum that can develop those programs for families and kids, and especially adolescents, I think has a huge social value. And just like that, what would be the main role of the educational department at a museum? We always have an education department in a museum, one way or another. This is part of the museum. Maybe in the past there will be someone reporting to curators, but now they are independent departments. And as part of these three basic functions, well, I have 9, but I will only mention 4. First, contribute to the training of the general audience, especially of the youngster coming there, because if it's a university institution. Secondly, we need to appreciate the educational activity in a museum. I would also mention the task of revision of the learning material edited by the museum, together with all other departments, especially the artistic department. And finally, the mission of the educational department would be contribute to research, scientific research, and its implementation to real life and people's lives. And so, as a final conclusion, I would like to finish up by saying that museums are seen as an opportunity, a very special opportunity to counteract the instrumental culture that I mentioned when I started, and the lack of communication as well. Naturally, programs that might be developed at a museum are not a one-size-fits-all, but can be helpful, can complement, and can be in line with the needs that we find in societies, the need for internal communication and the need to share spare time. I think for both, for the promotion of internal communication as part of the family environment and sharing spare time, free time, are 2 specific elements on which the educational programs developed at musea may play a relevant role. And that's all for me. As part of the handout you all have, there is a literature list. Might be too wide, but if you're interested in the topic, and if I'm not mistaken, I've also added, I wanted to acknowledge 2 entities that helped me develop or conduct this research. First, my university. Secondly, Oxford, University of Oxford, where I was lucky to work at their University Museum. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And this is the paper that I mentioned. I think it's not been included because it was released a bit later. If you're interested in today's topic, it's written in Italian, but you can easily understand it. It goes deeper into the topic and is probably tidier than what I said here. And there's another paper in the literature list that was published early 2015, late 2014, which is a monograph at an Italian magazine that it's Education, Sciences and Society. As I said, a monograph on arts and museum education, where we see a collection of an international task force, Italian, English, and Spanish researchers working on the topic. It might be interesting if you would like to look into it. It could be a reference. In any case, from now onwards, I'm open to emails if you have questions, and I will be happy to discuss all these topics. So far, that's been all. And now I open the floor for questions.
Si alguien se anima a hacer algún comentario, preguntas, sí. Hola, buenas tardes.
If there are any questions in the room, hi, good afternoon, good morning. First, I would like to congratulate you on your presentation, and the research is being conducted on the topic aesthetics, museum, and the arts. I'm a primary teacher, and we are in a remote village. We don't have many museums nearby, but I'm passionate about it. So my class is museum-like, and we tend to have exhibits and decoration for kids to understand, because the psychological influence is high, because when they come into the classroom, they have their own works and decoration, lots of color, and that's where you can start working on aesthetics, because a museum aesthetics, if you with your family have a chance to visit a city, a main city, and then you're going to have a chance to have someone to explain it to you, then you get to love the arts, because you get people who can explain it. But this is a public school, or whatever it is like, that school, where the reality is different, problems are different. I think as teachers, we need to promote it all in the classroom itself, as if it were their own homes, or even better, because maybe those aesthetics, the aesthetics, is not present at home. So I've been working in the public education field for over 20 years now, and I encourage or increase this aesthetic in the classroom. And now we have new technologies, and working with the iPad and screen connection, and maybe we can visit web pages where we can have 3D visits to museum, and that's an opportunity for them. So first, web pages that you're familiar with, that we can use in the classroom without having to visit the museum, because we do not have the resources to visit them. And secondly, I don't think it is a question that you can take here, but still, if that's the case, because the old Greek peoples used to say that music and plastic arts are the first items, and I agree, in order to promote activity and maths and literature. Why is it that, well, I refer to Spain because I'm not familiar with others, but how come it is so not important, the arts, I mean, we only have one session, and then if the management board are interested in following it all by the line, it's difficult because you have to finish the curriculum, and I have a fixed job, so I forget about them, and I don't mind dealing with the inspectors, because we need to change in the classroom. We need somehow to disregard the rules and devote more time to the music and the arts, to increase creativity as part of the from the rest of the curriculum. If you check the standards, you see that it's actually the other way around. And so I would like to refer to colleagues and people who might have an opportunity to work with 7, 8, or even 3, 4-year-old kids, and try to change that in the classroom in order to change the government, so to say, and see what's in the rest of Europe. That's what we are here for, but we need help for that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comment. I just need to congratulate you for your Are you from Zaragoza? Or from Valencia? Okay. congratulations on your momentum, on your initiative. I'm pretty certain that education can only thrive through utopia and awareness, as that just case. Actually, you forecast my answer. Even if the environment is difficult, you can never give up. There can be difficulties, but that's what we are here for, to go beyond difficulties. There's a retired professor in my university who says that in order to find a solution for a problem, you need to get out of the problem. Otherwise, you won't find it. You need to get outside. You need to see it from the outside. And that's what you've been able to do. Actually, I would dwell on the potential of families, regardless of resources they might have. Creativity and being resourceful are not enemies of human potential. And this can be developed, and we can help develop it in very different ways. And as you said as well, we have so many digital resources we can have access to. I don't have it with me, but if you email me, cenaval@cenat.es, I can forward you lots of material, because we actually conducted some research on the topic, following up musea, especially Spanish musea, follow-up of their web pages and the online resources. As for how can we change, where are we, why are we like we are? Well, the main problem is the pragmatic culture we live in. This doesn't fit in. And in order to be fair, also time limitations with the curriculum. It is overloaded for primary and secondary education. And so most of the things are considered on top. The challenge here would be how to make room for this part of education that it's needed, so much needed. It's not something that we can go without, and that's necessary to start training them in with regard to sensitivity, and this will have an impact on everything else. And we need to do so step by step. Laws have scope. I hope you don't misunderstand me. What's important is not changes in law, but changes in the base. We need to find teachers that are in harmony, in line with that. We need to have these hotspots by having teachers' networks to promote, to encourage this. We need to have teamwork as in any way we can, and we need to, through training targets, we need to cultivate imagination, creativity, memory. We need to make room in the classroom, in school, and non-formal areas. We need to make room for all of that. So my only answer is go on, be motivated. Good morning, everyone. I should like to thank you, Concepcion, for what you shared here. And despite, I have a few comments. I think we're here for discussion, and through discussion we derive knowledge. I'm Maria Caso. I work in arts education, especially education and museum. And that's what I'm here for, to discuss it. There's a series of items that I've noted, and I would like to discuss them all together, not just you and me, but see what others think. I was a bit worried from your presentation that still we see a problem that it is paramount for museum education. It seems that museum education depends on other disciplines, and that's something I'm fighting against. Education department should not be understood as something that helps translate what curators, artists, and directors want. In the end, the education department would be who we design programs for. And that's what I've not really understood from your presentation. I think this is one of the basic problems, and you said the education department reports to the general manager and seems to be consolidated in all museums. I don't agree. I think education departments are still in a precarious position. all other departments have fixed jobs and fixed-term jobs, and we have the worst salaries, sometimes outsourced. And I think it is not true. We're still the poor brother at the museum, and it's something that I would like to discuss, because even though almost all musea have an education department, we need to really look into the situation, see what's being done, and see if it's reporting to other departments. Then, when you say beauty and aesthetic education, we need to understand what's beauty. Here we have a museum outdoors, and there is this dog that is built with flowers or plants, and many people understand it as something that is horrible. So contemporary arts have a complicated understanding of beauty. So discussing what's beauty and the idea of aesthetics and what it means today might be too complicated for the time that we have allotted. Training in sensitivity is only sensitivity that we need to build on for aesthetic education. If it's only sensitivity and creativity for that aesthetic education, we are disregarding knowledge. We sometimes it's understood to be bound or linked to other disciplines, such as mathematics or literature, and then contributing to training different types of audiences. Often musea tend to patronize, and sometimes are others who need to educate musea. And I think it's important that visitors play a role in choosing education. I would like to discuss it. Contributing to scientific research, yes, naturally, education departments need to carry out research, but why scientific research? Why can't it not be arts-based or qualitative research? Then sharing spare time or free time. Musea, are they free time? Spare time? So again, we are driving away from the idea of knowledge. These are terms that I see repeated over and over in different places. So visiting a museum is not spare time, it's not time off. How do we find free time? And then you gave us examples from Harvard and Columbia. And as part of this event, I think we need to claim what's been done in Latin areas, in Spain, 3rd of May, MACBA, and we have documented 12, which is a critical exercise in mediation, it's never quoted. Then we have Mercosur Bienal and Marcovici working with different audiences. Honestly, I admire the Anglo-Saxon model, but yet we need to add visibility to Latin models, because otherwise we'll only refer to Columbia, Harvard, MoMA, and we will never refer to what we do. Thank you very much, Maria. I think you could have given us a presentation yourself. They would have been complimentary. I'll be there if you give one. As for the first item, museum at the service, or no, I just meant the opposite. Reporting to who? Well, the model I described comes from the Anglo-Saxon world where I worked, and so I've given examples. I work in the Latin world as well, but that's not been researched by me. And it's been in the Latin world where I've used most of my time. But the fact that I didn't mention it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or is not valuable. The fact that education departments are reporting directly to the board and not to curators, that would be a success story. And this is a fact that we find more and more in the Anglo-Saxon world. Those that I'm familiar with, that's what happens. MoMA, Harvard as well. So I think, and that's my idea, this is a line of work that will be very useful. Education is not a tool at the service of the artistic department. It is not just keep the kids entertained or amused. That's the greatest mistake. So my claim is to have an independent space for education in the museum, so I think we agree. As for beauty and aesthetics, I think we should discuss it over coffee. It is worth a coffee. Why scientific research? Well, I mentioned it because this is the university setting, and I can scientific research is both quantitative and qualitative, right? Yes, I think so. Scientific research is not empirical or experimental. We have qualitative research that is and should be called scientific, fully scientific. Scientific is not only empirical or experimental. There we are narrowing down the world of knowledge if we do so. So we can have qualitative scientific research very close down to the field of work, where we work on all techniques offered by qualitative investigation. And you're familiar with it. Spare time, time off, free time. Well, my time is always spare, it's always free. So if I go to a museum, that's part of the time that I want to use for a museum visit. So it's not a debris, but it's part of the time where I share with others that idea, those experiences, intuition, etc. Empowering the audience. Yes. You can learn from who's teaching and from the feedback as well. I was down there listening to Danucci at the auditorium. I don't know if you were there. And he said how important it is to understand the learning opportunity that comes from listening to kids. Thank you, Maria, very much. I hope we have time for a personal conversation. I'm Adi Bars. I'm an architect, but I'm now part of the management board of a school. And the topic you discuss, I find it very interesting for my own because of my own training, and because I see how lacking our curriculum is when it comes to aesthetic education and the lack of understanding in society about what beauty is and where it is to be found. One of my greatest concerns would be how geometry has gone out of mathematics. In the examinations taken, geometry is always the worst scored because that's the one that it's left outside during the term, during the academic year. And so I would like to encourage museum, if you may, help convey or transfer geometry or beauty, order, proportion-related contents to exhibits where they are made evident. So, if a student understands the existence of the gold section in a painting, understands the value of proportion, and understands that beauty is not transcendental, but it has a sense in relation to other items. The shapes of snails, spirals, or architectural structures, we need to bring beauty closer to the schoolroom reality. And we also need, as part of our disciplines, we teachers need to understand things that have to do with aesthetics and beauty. In literature, we find abundant examples. You can relate literature and poetry to music. You can find many examples in mathematics as well. But yet, it seems we teachers, we don't have the knowledge. We are unaware of the relationship. And so I would like to encourage to have exhibits where we see the relationship between different disciplines and the world of aesthetics and beauty. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's right. What you referred to, mathematics and geometry, I fully agree. I have many architects in my family, so you know that geometry in the first year of architecture tended to be the most difficult subject, but, well, it's not relevant anymore. But you mentioned two very interesting things. We need to promote exhibits where we see how those contents are transferred. And I think this lies with MUSEA, yes, but it lies with you as well, working at teaching or educational centers. You can promote it as well from there. I think it's worth discussing. Maybe as a result or outcome of this conference, we can have a task force to discuss it, because here at this conference we have so many people who could pitch in here. And so I would like you to suggest it to the organizing committee. Maybe we could have some post-conference conference activity in line with this. And you also mentioned another topic which I find, well, in my opinion, very relevant, and that is what do we find for teachers training, primary, kindergarten, and even secondary teachers? What can we have to help them increase their sensitivity and interest into these topics? Often, I might be wrong though, I'm given to understand that when teaching primary, especially kindergarten, but also primary teachers, when training them, we stick just to basic craftsmanship, and sometimes we need something going further. What's beauty? What's aesthetics? After that, we can have an idea. Are you teaching mathematics? Are you teaching history? So yes, I would like to refer to that later on. I think we need to rethink as part of our curricula when we talk about kindergarten or primary, or even for secondary teaching. What can we add from those elements? What could be helpful later on? Even if the law falls upon them, as it was mentioned during the first question, but maybe they might have the idea, the background, in order to rephrase it. Thank you very much. Concepcion, I have a question. I'm shocked, actually, but I see how teenagers, for the last decade or so, ugliness. You mentioned it tangentially or sideline, but I think there's a definition of beauty. And this is for the whole human society. What's beautiful, it's attractive, and gets closer. Maybe I will join you for coffee and discuss beauty, because I think it's universal and belongs to every human being. And yet now, I don't know if it's because of a lack of aesthetic education, or maybe because of social rebellion, typical of teenagers, and then they grow out of it. But adolescents, and even when you go as old as 40, people like what's ugly. Attracted but was ugly. Can you discuss it? Because even in museums sometimes, out of lack of knowledge about the age you are, and maybe it has nothing to do with the beauty. And even happens with teenagers. You take them for some glassworks, tainted glass in any Gothic cathedral in Spain, and they might say, well, it's boring because I saw one when I was 12. Or even watching the sunset several times, where they say, you know, we saw one the other day. So we don't have this idea of what's beautiful anymore. There are two questions that for contemporary education I find concerning. First, the lack of aesthetic education that I mentioned, but I'll go back to your comment now. And other that might not be considered as it should, the risks of exposure to technologies in the early years of life. First question, that's the topic for today. I don't know if even if it's referred to as ugliness. Well, what I think is a lack or people haven't learned how to understand what's beautiful in life. I don't think it is love for what's ugly. I think as a teenager, they are rebels. There's rebellion, and there may be a cultural trend that leads to ugliness, which is a, well, funny name, right? Ugliness. But if we think of kids and adolescents, that's not the main concern. We should be concerned and make sure that we make room for that knowledge to happen. Culturing, the idea of learning how to detect what's beautiful in around us, in things, but especially in people. This has to do with the lack of respect or learning how to respect, if we put it in positive terms. We need to respect things and people around us, and that's the path I would follow. How can we save or recover rooms for spaces for learning and culturing, aesthetic sensitivity, and how to make room to culture respecting human relations? I think we can learn from that. Yes, I've worked with kids for such a long time, and the colored clay that could be a craft. I think that's where we have creativity for kids. I think that's what's done. Problem is when they move on to primary education or even secondary education, where we see everything that had been done previous years with small kids, it's broken up, and seems that 12, 13-year-old kids have non-decorated walls and empty classrooms. In secondary, we need to have a full change for everything, because I have a teenager girl, and that's the same as our colleague said. It's Facebook. She's in Dublin now. She went to a Vikings museum. I don't like it. It's boring. So they don't know how to appreciate it all, and that's why those changes are necessary. We need to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.